Lila Rose, president and founder of Live Action and author of the new book, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World, joins us now on Skype. Lila, in reading your book, it feels one part memoir, one part inspiring self-help book. How would you describe Fighting for Life, and why did you want to release your first book now?
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I'm so excited to be sharing about it. I consider it a manual for anyone, or a guidebook for anybody who sees the crisis around us. I mean, the world has so many problems and injustices. I think that we sense it as people of faith. We see it as Catholics. We see it as the forces of evil that are working to harm others out there. And we understand that we need to stand up and make a difference. And so the book is a collection of my experiences and stories, the lessons that I've learned, the hard lessons I've had to learn over the years of activism, working internationally in the pro-life fight, so that I can help others stand up for life as well and make a difference in the world, because each of us are called to make a difference. It'll look different for each of us, but I think we need to each have that encouragement and inspiration to know, what is my calling, what is my role, and then stand up and make the difference.
Absolutely. You are very vulnerable in your book, Lila, and really pull back the curtain on parts of your life. In chapter 4, you reveal that as a teenager, you dealt with cutting and with binging and purging food, writing, quote, "Cutting and extreme behaviors with food were the experimental coping strategies I had developed for dealing with a depression that had descended on me over the previous year like a bewildering fog." Lila, I'm so grateful you're on the other side of that. And I think people who know your public image would be surprised to hear you dealt with depression and cutting and eating disorders. Can you discuss that part of your life, and what's your hope in sharing this part about yourself?
Sure. Well, I share some tough things, like you just read, Catherine, in the book, about things that I've been through, especially as a very young girl, because I think there's sometimes this sense that, oh, somebody who's like doing pro-life activism full time, or, leading an organization, they have it all together, and they're going to just, they never had any hard things in their life. And so it's really not something that maybe a person feels that they can aspire to. What I'm trying to show is that we all have challenges in our lives. And especially as young women, and if you have a young woman in your life, there's so many terrible forces and influences that girls face and experience. And so I wanted to talk candidly about that in the book, but to also present the message of hope that we can overcome these things, that God has a calling for each and every one of us, each and every young person, particularly despite the struggles they may be going through. God has a mission for you, and that there is healing for you. And if we're willing to step into that and embrace that and get the help that we need, and ultimately see the plan that God has for us, it can change everything. So I shared that because when I really discovered the pro-life calling that God had for me, I started Live Action. I started getting the help that I needed. I started my own healing journey. That really was a transformation for me, and I want other people to experience that too.
You take us behind the scenes to you becoming a pro-life leader. You were only a high schooler when you started Live Action. What drew you into the pro-life cause, and why did you have such a strong conviction from the get-go?
Well, I think that was the result of becoming aware of what abortion was at a young age. A lot of people don't know what abortion is. They don't see it as this horrific violence against an innocent human child. And they also might not think that they can do anything about the problem if they do find out about it. And I share about how I had certain inspiration points in my life, and I provide tips for how we can, use those same inspiration points ourselves to see that, yes, I do have a role to play. This is a huge human rights abuse. This is a huge tragedy, but I have a role to play in standing up against it. And I have to get started and overcome my own insecurities and fears to get started. So I shared step by step how I did that. And again, hopes to inspire others to say, listen, when you see a problem in the world, when you see something that breaks your heart, and for many of us, that's abortion, that's the fact that 2,300 children are killed each day by abortion, there's a reason your heart is breaking. There's a reason you feel upset. God can use that heartache, that frustration you feel, to use it for good, so you can stand up and be a force for change. And so I talk about how when I discovered about abortion and I just started Live Action, God took me one step at a time, because I was willing to just put myself out there, get started, start talking to friends and family about it. And that's what I encourage others to do too, is if you can just get started, be willing to make that difference, even if it might seem overwhelming at first, just take that first step. That can make all the difference.
Well, speaking of that, your book outlines your search for God as well and how you converted to Catholicism. How, Lila, has your Catholic faith played a role in your pro-life work?
Well, it's meant everything. Becoming Catholic in college, I share the story of, how I became Catholic, entered into the Catholic Church, and just receiving the Eucharist, getting to go to confession, all of these things transformed me and have strengthened me in ways I could have never have imagined before growing up in an evangelical home, a very loving evangelical home. But again, I didn't have the fullness of the faith. So I share that story because I think that's instrumental for any young person who's trying to find their calling or their cause. It is inextricably bound up in our relationship with God, in who God is and what his plans are for us. And for me, after study and prayer, I ended up in the church by God's grace, in the Catholic Church. And that was, again, a deeper understanding of my own identity and mission, because I had this pro-life mission before becoming Catholic. But when I became Catholic, I realized that it wasn't just a pro-life mission, but it was a mission as a daughter of God to become a saint. And that would ultimately lead me to becoming married and realizing that my vocation to marriage was the ultimate mission, and now as a mother was this ultimate mission. But that understanding, that formation was only possible as I entered the church and began to receive the riches of being Catholic. So I share that story in hopes, again, that others who are passionate about their causes and passionate about their calling can understand that it's directly tied to how they discover God and allow God to discover them.
You give a shout out to EWTN and Mother Angelica in your book. How has Mother Angelica inspired you, Lila?
Well, she's a huge inspiration to me. As a young girl, I think in college, I went to the Birmingham campus for the first time to do an EWTN show on my early undercover investigative reporting at the time. And I began to learn about Mother Angelica. I didn't know about her growing up, but I began to learn about her in my early 20s. And I was just so inspired by her fidelity and her faith. I mean, this is a woman who had this calling. Again, she wanted to spread the gospel. She wanted to start this media network. And she had this passionate calling to take the next step, even though it wasn't all figured out, and to move forward in faith. And she, didn't have I share the story in my book in Fighting for Life. She didn't, have the money for the satellite she needed. And she went and bought it anyways. And then God sent her the check because she just believed, I need to do this. God will provide. And she took that risk. And I think her risk taking, her faith, and her passion to make a difference in the world is an example, certainly to me, and an example to all of us.
Lila, now in your new season as a wife and mother, how do you think this season will allow you to better serve the pro-life movement?
So I talk a lot in the book about how, we can pour ourselves out for a cause and what that looks like, the risks we need to take, the insecurities we need to overcome, the personal healing we need to go through, how we have to take the hits because it can be controversial to stand up for what's right in today's world. So I talk about all of that. But I also was very intentional about talking about vocation in the sense of, we're not just activists. And I think that this is an important message, not just for young people, but for all of us. We see the culture battles, we see the fights we need to fight, and we need to fight them. But ultimately, the best way that we contribute is by loving and serving the people we're entrusted with. And that is often our spouses and our children, or maybe our grandchildren, or our sisters and our brothers. And for me, marrying my husband, that is my ultimate mission, is to get to heaven, help him get to heaven, and I pray, help lead our children to heaven. And by doing that, by building beautiful, thriving families that are healthy and loving and sacrificial for one another, that's how we restore our culture. That's how we ultimately end abortion and build a culture of life, by creating something good. So I talk about the courage that we need to commit and to take responsibility and to love sacrificially, and how through God we can do all of that. And that is the secret to building a world that is healed.
You really emphasize the importance of personal development, Lila. Why is personal development something every Catholic and pro-lifer should take seriously, especially if they want to be, as you say, a force for change?
It's a great question. And I talk a lot in the book about activism and political work and, a lot of these important efforts to fight the good fight culturally and politically. But ultimately, it hinges on our own personal transformation. The change has to start within. And I think this is an especially important lesson for young people because I think they're taught and we're taught to look so much at, what's wrong around us, the sins of the world around us, the problems around us, when we need to take stock of what's inside of us. Maybe the traumas or the hurts from our own childhood, the good and the bad that we need to embrace and heal from. Our own faith, our own personal mistakes and sins that we need to reckon with. A path of mentorship. I talk a lot about mentorship and teaching how we need to be students, life students, and be constantly trying to grow in virtue and how important virtues are. These are maybe not popular to talk about in today's culture, but I think they're essential, especially for young people. So I walk through some of the lessons that I learned in doing that, the clumsy mistakes I made, but ultimately how through the help of mentors, faith, learning, education, I've been able to grow as a person, from a lot of the hurts and the dysfunctions and the mistakes of my own past, and how I'm still on that learning journey today. And I invite the reader to join me on it.
Mm-hmm. Lila, as we've discussed, you did share a lot of hard stories and you were really vulnerable in this book. Do you think there's something to that about being vulnerable and sharing personal stories that might help make connections with people who disagree with us on the pro-life issue? Perhaps your vulnerability will open some doors and conversations and help people to see you and this cause in a more personal light.
I mean, I would absolutely hope that by sharing, and the reason I shared what I shared in the book, some of my hardest moments in my life and some of my greatest struggles and mistakes is because I think that, again, making a difference in the world begins with our own interior healing and the willingness to grow ourselves. And I needed to be honest about that. I'm not some hero who's perfect, who's out there, doing this amazing activism all the time. I'm a 100% flawed human being, but I'm eager to learn and grow. And I think that if we are eager to learn and grow and we get the tools that we need, the guidance that we need, we're willing to be faithful to the truth, then we can grow, we can make a difference in the world. And I think that's true for friend and foe alike. And I think, my hope is that those who read the book, who might not be pro-life, can understand that, we're all human. We're all on a journey to learn and to grow. And if we have goodwill, if we're willing to admit our mistakes, then the sky's the limit. Anything is possible for us. It's only when we close ourselves off, when we refuse to admit our own mistakes or weaknesses, that we stop growing. So that is my hope in sharing my own challenges, is that to say, listen, we all have them. So let's be willing to be honest about our need to grow, and that will open the path for growth.
Well done, and truly congratulations on this book. Lila, is there anything else you wanted to share with our viewers about Fighting for Life?
Thank you. Well, I think the crescendo or the end of Fighting for Life is there is so much hope for our country, for our world, for our culture. I think, again, it's hard to look out sometimes and see the battles that are being fought, see the politics and get discouraged. But the message of Fighting for Life is you were born at this time in history for a particular purpose. God has a plan and a calling for your life. I hope that you can step into that calling and embrace it. And I hope Fighting for Life gives you the tools and the inspiration just to do that.
Amen to that. Again, congratulations, Lila Rose, author of the new book, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.